It's a big subject matter, Michael, protecting the Irish environment. So tell us how you addressed that and which areas you decided to focus on.
Well, Eamon, I suppose the first thing is to note the huge importance of the Irish environment to tourists. Repeated surveys over the years have shown that tourists coming to Ireland place people and landscape at the top of their agenda. And these are our primary assets. They're the primary assets for a business which at the moment is generating more jobs than any other sector of the economy, and which is rooted to Ireland. You can't outsource tourism, you can't export to another country. And so it would be a huge shame if we were to damage our primary tourism asset in favour of other activities which may simply be transient.
Well, indeed. So let's look at some of the issues before we come back to the landscape. Dereliction in towns and villages.
I think this is something that's come to the fore a little bit more as a result of the recession, where we've seen a lot of towns losing businesses and losing population as well. And these are features of Ireland and of the Irish countryside, you could say, the small villages and towns that are important to tourists and that are important to all of us, really. And maintaining that resource, I think, is important. So it would be terrific if we could find some way of renewing small villages and towns, perhaps in some way of incentivising people to live in them. It seems to be very popular in other countries like Britain and France, where people go live in villages. We should perhaps find some way of encouraging that here.
Sure. Water pollution?
Water, I think people must be very surprised if they arrive in Ireland and find they have to boil their water before drinking it, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
It's shocking, actually. There's a huge task for the new agency, Irish Water, to deal with that. We should never have to encounter that type of problem.
But it's very basic, but they are getting down to it at least. It's going to take a little time, I suppose.
Well, hopefully we'll have a cure early.
Yeah, traffic congestion in key urban tourism centres.
I think the issue here has a lot to do with coach tourism. I mean, some people don't realise it, but coach tourism is a very large part of our tourism business.
Sure.
We have a very large number of people, and we've estimated that 750,000 overseas tourists, at least every year, are using coach tours either for overnight coach tours, tours around Ireland, or for day coach trips, which have become hugely popular with the advent of the motorways. There's a real problem now in a lot of towns as to navigating towns, and in particular finding safe and secure parking for coaches.
Absolutely. And another issue that's been around for quite some time, salmon farming.
It's a very contentious subject.
For and against.
It's a very contentious subject, and strong arguments are marshalled by both sides, and they're both seeking to find science to back themselves. I think that the evidence would suggest that salmon farming can cause problems, and it is a question of siting salmon farms very carefully so that we don't create risk what is another very valuable resource.
Absolutely. So now let's turn to the landscape. What are the areas that we need to be sensitive to here, Michael, about the landscape?
Well, when you do anything, any kind of development on the landscape is in a sense irreversible. The Lady Macbeth line, what's done cannot be undone, that applies very specifically to landscape. And it's not that landscape is something that should be kept unchanging. Landscape will evolve over time. It always has done and always will. So we're not trying to create a static point in time, fix the landscape at a certain point, but rather it should be managed with great care. And that's the point we're really trying to make. We feel that there has insufficient care has been given to managing our landscape. And we feel this is a very important, a vital issue for tourism.
Indeed, and I suppose however contentious, Michael, no report like this would be complete without reference to wind turbines and electricity cable pylons. So let's take the pylons first.
Of all the things you put in the landscape, electricity pylons are the things that people hate most. And the surveys show that sometimes about 80% of people hate them. We have to live with pylons, and every developed country has electricity pylons. We have to have them, but it's where they're located again. It's where you choose routes for major lines, and there's two under at issue at the moment. There's the grid link, which runs from Cork to Kildare, and there's the grid west, which runs from Mayo to Roscommon. There's also a north-south interconnector, and these lines certainly over parts of their distance, the routes go through highly scenic areas. And the previous Minister for Energy, Pat Rabbitte, he set up a group to look at the issue of whether you can underground lines to any great extent. And I know that there are many technical issues involved in this, and there may be cost implications, but really the cost implications may not be significant if weighed against the cost of the damage that could be caused to tourism. So what we would strongly recommend is that in the prime scenic areas, undergrounding should be pursued.
And I suppose the same idea would apply to wind turbines where the area is particularly sensitive.
Again, it's the same thing. There's been a lot of surveys of tourists, both here and overseas, on how tourists respond to wind turbines. And generally, they're not unhappy if they're looking at wind turbines over there
in the distance.
And they're quite happy, and they feel good about it even, and say, well, this is great, renewable energy and so on, and it all seems very eco-friendly. The problem arises when the wind turbine is right next door, in the field next door, and these now are huge structures. I mean, they reach to way over 100 metres in height, especially if the vanes themselves are taken into account. Again, it's an issue. Where do you put these? I mean, I'm familiar with an instance where wind turbines are now likely to be located right next door to an ecotourism farm, and it probably spells the end of that project. And it's a huge shame. I think that's also an economic loss, which probably has not been factored into anybody's sums on this project. So again, it's a question of we don't oppose wind turbines. We're not suggesting that's valid. We think wind energy is a good idea. It's where you put the turbines is the issue. The issue,
indeed. And finally, Michael, there are some moves afoot by the government on introducing adequate landscape protection measures. Isn't that right? We've had a recent publication.
I mean, this actually appeared, funny enough, while we were working on this document, and we're really pleased to see it. It's a draft national landscape strategy published by the Department of Arts, Heritage and Gaeltacht, and our first recommendation on that is that it should be finalised and implemented quickly, as a matter of absolute urgency.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. This is a terrific report. I recommend it as, well, it should be compulsory reading for everybody. But, you know, the thrust of the chat we've just had talks about the stuff that we should be doing for tourism and for tourists, but we should be doing this for ourselves. We live here. This is our land.
Absolutely. It's as much, if not even more, for Irish people as it is, or for all the community living here, as it is for visitors.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Ian.